Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman, and this is Dissident Dispatch, a show where I talk about things that are going on currently, sort of in the news. Maybe they're, getting a lot of play on Twitter, things like that. And it tends to be where current events and education meet. That's what I do in Dissident Dispatch. So the show is every Monday, 7 p.m. live. I'm glad you're here. If it's your first time at the channel, please consider subscribing to be notified when I make new content. And also, if you would consider, if you're interested in being part of the solution to our education crisis in America, I would encourage you to consider joining my community over at Wokescreen. That is at wokescreen.com/the reason we learn. Lots of new things coming in the new year there, including a parent support group for parents who are just dealing with having their kids in the schools and they want to get together with other parents and talk about what a challenge that is. This isn't for complaining necessarily, it's about for coping and tapping into community to figure out ways to do that. So we'll be setting that up in the new year. So I encourage you to join. Today's topic. I got the idea for this topic because I started seeing a lot of Twitter posts doing what I would call Holocaust inversion. Not just Twitter posts, articles, people speaking into microphones on the news, in videos, who are out protesting for the Palestinians. And they're calling it a Holocaust. They're calling what they're doing, what the Israelis are doing in Gaza, another Holocaust. We call it Holocaust inversion. That would be when you have people who are actually doing something or promoting something genocidal like the Holocaust, who flip it over and paint themselves to be the victims. And that is what we see going on right now with the Palestinian protest or the pro-Palestinian protesters. And I say that because the rhetoric that you're hearing coming from them is 100% genocidal. There's nothing about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free that is not genocidal. And I don't mean just for Jews. It is obviously targeted at Jews, but there are 2 million Arabs, Christians, Muslims, Druze, etc., who are not Jews in Israel. And Hamas means to remove anyone who will not be loyal to Hamas, who will not be loyal to the new Islamist nation they want to put in that place. And not even a nation. They want to just expand Islam across the region so that not only the whole north of Africa and up, in the, sort of Iraq, Iran, and, that area and every other neighbor of Israel will be Muslim, but also what was Israel. So this is about domination. This is about expansion of Islamism. And they're not going to treat the Christians any better, or the Druze, or the Arabs who are loyal citizens of Israel. And as I said, there are 2 million of them. So it's genocidal language. And one way you can test that is if you flipped it around. And I sort of wish that the pro-Israel protesters would do this, since I think it's a rational position to take that innocent, decent Arabs in Gaza would want to get rid of Hamas. They're objectively murderous terrorists. And even if you wanted to say, well, I made some kind of excuse, you really can't get past the fact that they are religious totalitarians. That's just, even if you gave them the whole, it's resistance, whatever, resistance by Islamist totalitarians. So is that really resistance after all? Like, at what point are you not resisting when your goal is domination? It's kind of hard to square that circle, right? So they are, if we flipped it around and said from the river to the sea, Israel will be free. And we started floating the idea of a one-state solution in which Arabs, just like the 2 million who currently live in Israel, would be absolutely free to coexist in Israel with Gaza absorbed, the West Bank absorbed. Come on, we're gonna have one big country, all of us living. It's gonna be Israel. Yeah, it's going to be Israel. But if you can peacefully coexist with us, then yeah, we'll be free of Islamic totalitarianism. We'll be free of Islamic domination. We will not be a theocracy because Israel is not a theocracy. It's a Zionist state. It is a Jewish, nationalist state, if you want to say that, kind of like how France is French, right? Or China is Chinese, or Japan is Japanese, or Armenia is Armenian, or, Turkey is Turkish. Minorities live there. Religious minorities can live in these countries, but let's face it, they're run by their majority population. So, if we said that from the river to the sea, Israel would be free, people would immediately jump on the bandwagon of, you see, they mean to ethnically cleanse Gaza and the West Bank. Do you hear what they're saying? They're using genocidal language. But when Palestinian supporters are saying it, oh no, we just want to rid ourselves of the occupation. What occupation? There is no occupation. Gaza hasn't had Israelis there or Jews there since, it's been going on 19 years now. So, what occupation are they talking about? They're talking about the occupation of Israel. It's not an occupation, it's a country. So we can objectively, I think, and I think I could get, some people to back me up on this, say that from the river to the sea, if you look at Hamas's charter, is genocidal language. So that is a Holocaust inversion. You don't get to use that kind of language and advocate for that kind of policy and then claim you're a victim of a Holocaust, especially to use that term. I see them using genocide and Holocaust interchangeably, but lately, today, it's been Holocaust. And some of the tweets are downright disgusting. I'll show you an example of one, and then I'll get to why I'm doing this on an education channel, because it is relevant. So I'm going to share my screen, and these are some of my bookmarks. Okay. So here, this person says Holocaust inversion is one of the highest forms of anti-Semitism. I agree. Francesca, whatever, Albanese, this is a UN special rapporteur, or the worst kind of anti-Semite. This is what this individual said. Fellow Europeans, Italians, Germans, after the Holocaust, we should instinctively know that genocide starts with dehumanizing the other. Now, that's true. That is true. However, it's what she says next. If Israel's current attack against Palestinians doesn't prompt our strong reaction, the darkest page of our recent history has taught us nothing. That's interesting. Because if you listen to Hamas language or read their charter or look at any of their news or their curricula when they teach their kids, it's pretty clear. They even referred in some of their videos during the 10/7 attacks to the Jews they were attacking as pigs and dogs. As pigs and dogs. Okay. We've seen some of the videos, tragically. We've seen how they treated people. We also see, by the way, how they treat pigs and dogs. They don't touch pigs, but dogs, they're not very kind to. In fact, they murdered a few of them during their raids on 10/7, just for no reason. These weren't attack dogs or guard dogs. They just shot an aging Labrador that was lumbering towards them. Like, why? Okay, so we've seen abuse of puppies. We've seen, and I'm not making this up. You can go find this footage. In fact, you can find footage of little puppies wrapped in Israeli flags, and you can see Palestinian youth like throwing them around, kicking them, etc., as they represent the Jewish dog. So again, this is inversion. The dehumanization is being done by the people who took Jews prisoner, abused them, raped them, beheaded some of them, cut babies out of their mother's wombs, etc. What is more dehumanizing than that? That's not legitimate resistance. That wasn't an attack on a military base. That was taking people out of their beds, quite literally, at torturing them, raping them, mutilating them, etc. And then speaking about them while they're doing it as if they're not even human. And like I said, when you back this up with all that they teach their own children, the dehumanization is going on there. I do not hear the IDF or the Israeli government or even most of the Israeli people, never mind random Jews in America. Okay. I don't hear people talking about Palestinians in this way. I don't. Or certainly I didn't before October 7th. I think we can maybe throw some people a bone if they're so upset and they're so terrorized and they're so scared and angry that they throw in some epithet at this point. I'm not excusing it and saying that it's, necessarily right, because if you're talking about all the Gazans, obviously, you have to limit it to Hamas. But I still don't hear that the way I hear it from Hamas, where it's explicit. So they're not acknowledging that the leadership in Gaza, the official elected leadership, how many people support them is really immaterial. Do you want to believe that every single German was just suddenly rabidly anti-Jewish? But that was their government, and they decided to go to war. And when you defend yourself against an attack started by started by somebody else's government, that does not make you perpetrating an ethnic cleansing, a genocide, or a Holocaust, even if a lot of people died. Even if a lot of people die. That would be like saying that in defending the free world during World War II, we perpetrated a Holocaust on the Japanese. No, we didn't. And part of the reason that that kind of inversion is so wrong and dangerous is that it completely negates the factory level precision and intentionality of slaughter that the Holocaust was. And ironically, October 7th, while it was obviously not factory, systematized and efficient, it was planned, it was orchestrated, it was targeted at civilians who were helpless, innocent children, women, babies. These are not soldiers. That is more morally equivalent to what the Nazis did. Just these are not even people. They're pigs and dogs. Than is what Israel's doing, even if the bombs are bigger and the destruction is bigger. So what they're doing is they're taking lots of people die, lots of people die. Oh, look, it's the same. That's not what a Holocaust is. That's not what a genocide is. Lots of people dying in a war is not a genocide or a Holocaust, but that's what Holocaust inversion tries to tell you it is. Here's another one that was truly despicable. If the Jews being shot and shoveled into ovens could just break through that wall, of course they would kill anyone they found partying right on the other side of it. And of course they would take women and children hostage and drag them back to their hell inside. I'm not even going to read the rest of it. And this man is quite right. Come for the Holocaust minimization if Gaza is Auschwitz and Auschwitz is no longer an industrial death factory where 1.1 million people were murdered. Stay for the look what you made me do justification for sexual torture, rape, abduction, slaughtering of kids in their homes. It's also completely false. When Jews got out of the camps, and in some cases they were liberated by Jewish soldiers from the Allied side, they did not just go into town, those Jewish soldiers, and they didn't even ask to, they didn't even want to, and just start raping, murdering, pillaging Germans or Poles or whatever as some kind of payback for the horrors they saw. Even years later, you didn't see people, Israelis, training descendants of Holocaust survivors, training their children to hate the Germans and hate the Poles, and go to Germany or go to Poland and wreak whatever havoc they possibly could as some kind of, to liberate them from whatever they were dealing with. Even in Israel, when they were fighting all the subsequent wars after they were attacked and attacked and attacked from the outside after Israel was born, they didn't go into these areas while they were fighting and rape people. They killed people and they were killed. And that's what war is. But there was not a systematic, let's just wipe them off the face of the earth and we won't have to deal with this problem anymore. Hamas is saying, let's wipe them off the face of the earth and we won't have to deal with them anymore. They're not the same. They're not the same no matter how many Palestinians die in this war. That's just, they're not the same. And then finally, I want to point this out. Well, this is actually, oh, wait, here, let me scroll down here. I posted one single news story to Instagram about Hamas raping Israeli women, and the comments are feral. This is a new Holocaust denialism. You believe the Jewish owned media? You're trying to get more Zionist Jew followers? How much have the Israelis paid you? So, what I showed you before was Holocaust inversion. This is using tropes, anti Semitic tropes, to deny attacks against Jews. Uh, It, I mean, it's insane. It's really insane. I'm going to use hatred of Jews to deny things that have happened to Jews. Oh, P.S., you're perpetrating a Holocaust against these other people. It, it almost like gives me a brain cramp. So finally, I'm going to lead into what I want to talk to you about tonight with this wonderful post from Zachor Shoah, Holocaust and Human Rights Education. They specialize in Holocaust education. I encourage you to look into them. I think they're doing it right, and I'll get into that more. But virtue-based education coupled with facts-based curriculum would undo the hijacking of Holocaust education, if not all education, in a very short period of time. Responding to Beanie, who said Freedom and Ed is encouraging schools to move away from values education, whose values get taught, towards virtues cultivation. Every parent wants their children to learn honesty, courage, humility, temperance, perseverance, etc. They can be cultivated through good books. Now, what is the difference between values-based and virtues-based? Well, virtues we can identify. We can actually label them: honesty, humility, etc., and so forth. Values is like kind of a moving target. Like she said, whose values? Who gets to decide? But we can look up virtues in the dictionary and see what they are. And it's a rare person who's going to say honesty is not a virtue and humility is not a virtue, right? So, virtues based is what's missing. And when it's explicitly missing from Holocaust education, we have problems. So, how are we doing it now? What are we doing? Well, I'm going to lead into this topic with something that was just published in Commentary, and it happens to reference one of my favorite justices, who is no longer with us. I know a lot of people don't like him. I did. I didn't agree with everything he ever said, but I had a lot of respect for him. Scalias Prophecy. This is Jewish Commentary, published this month already. This talks about a speech he went to address. In the at the occasion of the address was a ceremony marking Holocaust Memorial Day. The justice reflected that as honored as he was to participate, he found the invitation difficult to undertake as a non-Jew. I am an outsider speaking to an ancient people about a tragedy of unimaginable proportions that is intensely personal to them, Scalia further reflected. I am not only not a Jew, I am a Christian, and said he believed that the anti-Semitism in Christendom had helped set the stage for the mad tragedy that the National Socialists produced. He stressed, however, that for him, the ceremony of the day was personal. When I was a young man in college spending my junior year abroad, I saw Dachau. Later in the year after I graduated from law school, I saw Auschwitz. I will, of course, never forget the impression they made upon me. These remarks were interesting enough, but the most important part of the speech was yet to come. Scalia stressed that it was not enough to remember the Holocaust. I'm going to repeat that. It was not enough to remember the Holocaust. Rather, he said, one must mark the sort of society in which it occurred. Now, remember, they said, it begins with othering. True, but without virtue, like honesty, we can misidentify who's being othered, can't we? So you see, you can't just do one without the other. The one message I want to convey today is that you will have missed the most frightening aspect of it all if you do not appreciate that it happened in one of the most educated, most progressive, most cultured countries in the world. The Germany of the early 20th century, he noted, was a world leader in most fields of art, science, and intellect. Its universities were some of the most celebrated on earth, yet this did not prevent Nazism from suffusing society. In fact, German education and Nazism went hand in hand. Then suddenly Scalia switched from past to present and focused on his own family. This aspect of the matter is perhaps so prominent in my mind because I'm undergoing currently the task of selecting a college for the youngest of my children, or perhaps more accurately, trying to help her select it. American parents, Scalia reflected, place so much value today on what is taught in academic institutions, yet the opportunities afforded there, he argued, are of only secondary importance to our children and to the society that their generation will create. The Holocaust, Scalia argued, is a reminder of the importance of imparting moral wisdom above all else. And it is this, he was implicitly saying, that parents must bear in mind as they ponder the intellectual future of their progeny. That's what I wanted to read. There's more to the article, but I wanted to bring that up because it is the moral wisdom that is missing, in my opinion, from the way we are teaching the Holocaust in America. And that is not to say that we do not have wonderful, wonderful resources with which to teach, what happened, the timeline of what happened, even to a certain extent, the influences in the society that contributed to it happening as far as the events and the actions taken, and then the atrocities. We talk all the time about the atrocities. And of course, we do have to teach those. It's very important. But if we teach them just as a series of whens and wheres and hows, and we leave out the why, or we only skim the surface because they hated Jews, because they needed a scapegoat, because of, something like that. If we just skim through this and we fail to look at the way they completely restructured morality itself, we miss the most important point. And that's where we are now. We are living in a society where morality itself has been turned on its ear, where people will tell you there's no such thing as objective morality, or that morality must, by definition, be tied to religion. That leaves it wide open for the Islamists to come in and say, okay, we got religion, therefore we're moral. Wait, now that's not what we meant. How do you know what's right or wrong without religion? Well, I hope you do, because there are a few religions out there where I don't want to live with their sense of morality. So that's not to say that people don't derive lots of things from their religion. I'm not dissing on religion en masse. I'm saying that we need to have an understanding of morality, of right and wrong in our society that we can all agree on, that isn't an ever moving target, or you are absolutely a sitting duck for another Holocaust. And it doesn't matter how much you teach what happened, how many died, how much the Germans hated the Jews, even why they hated the Jews, even the history of their philosophy. I noticed that somebody here, BL, has said Stephen Hicks, who is wonderful, by the way. I hope to have him back to the show at some point in the new year, has a good video on German academic philosophy and how it led to Nazism. Oh, yes, there is so much. And I would recommend that you study it. But even if you didn't dive deep into the philosophy that underpinned Hitler's racial views of the world, etc., even if all you did was ponder what makes something right and what makes something wrong, what is a human being, what is good, what is evil, and really kind of hone in on that, you wouldn't need to do the other stuff. If you started asking more questions about what people are purporting is virtuous, tolerance of different things. People who are victims are inherently virtuous, we're told now. What defines a victim? Well, they're poor. Well, they are brown. Well, they live in some kind of, squalor. Well, they're, their life is just kind of miserable. That equals virtue. They're marginalized. Sound familiar? So if that's your definition of virtue, or that's your definition of, oh, I'm a virtuous person if I support that person over the person who seems successful and everything's, going okay. They have nice civilized cities and stuff. Must have done something bad to get that. See how your concept of good and evil and virtue can really feed the problem if you don't get it right the first time. So that's why I turn to people like Hannah Arendt And this article, I don't know the date when this was written, but I think it's relevant. Why do Hannah Arendt's ideas about evil and the Holocaust still matter? Well, they very much do. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Hannah Arendt survived the Holocaust herself. I mean, she was in a detention camp in France, and she escaped, and so on. But she did survive the war. She came to the United States. She wrote and taught about what went on, but most notably, she went to Jerusalem for the trial of Adolf Eichmann. And she wrote a very important book, a couple of important books, and she wrote articles while she was there about what was going on, what she saw. And she got in big trouble with Jews. She got in big trouble with Jews. She got in big trouble in Israel with Jews. And in fact, there are people in Israel still mad at her. Why? Because she put some of the blame on Jewish leaders who had helped the Nazis by sort of going along with some of their policies as if to say, well, this will be okay if we just do what they say, and so on and so forth. And they didn't see it coming, or they didn't fight back against it, even went along with it and told people to go along with it until it was too late. Um, so she identified something very important that we, in my opinion, don't teach enough of when we teach Holocaust, which is about the banality of evil. That it's not these horrible monsters. Even looking at Hamas, we think, oh my God, they're monsters. That's evil. Well, yes, they are evil and their behavior is evil. But what made Hamas possible? This is why the whole concept of, the innocent person, and are they? How innocent is a society that produces a Hamas? How truly innocent is a society that produces Nazism? And you might say, well, they didn't all agree with it. Of course, they didn't all agree with it. But at what point do you go from being a person who doesn't agree but doesn't say anything? Okay, you don't say anything for whatever reason, because I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to lose my friends. I don't want somebody to be mad at me. I don't want to be offensive. I want to fit in, blah, 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 blah. That's the banality of it. I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do because I didn't make the decision. I don't write the rules. Somebody else did it. And then you want to be, I'm an innocent. I'm innocent. It's not my fault. And what Hannah Arendt identified is there were Jews who did the whole, I just, just going to stay quiet. It's not that bad. It's not that big a deal. Just do what they say. We don't want to lose this, that, the other. And let's see what is the meaning of Arendt's famous phrase, the banality of evil. Let's read what this says. All of us have witnessed or suffered some form of evil in our lives caused by other people. We might have been the victim of a lie or a violent attack. We want to know on reflection what caused the person to commit this evil. What were his or her intentions? What made it possible for the person to form these evil intentions in the first place? We want a basis to judge the actions as wrong and assign moral responsibility. According to Arendt, the dominant answer to these questions involves a tendency to characterize evil as something deep or profound. One classic answer in Christian theology is to attribute evil to Eve's original sin in the Garden of Eden, which has subsequently tainted all of mankind. We are born with this tendency in our hearts, and only with God's aid can we overcome it. In this view, a person is morally evil when he or she allows base demonic instincts to overcome the goodness contained in the knowledge of God's law. Much of the way in which we talk about crime and punishment, even if it has been secularized in psychological discourse, is expressed in these terms. It is common, for instance, to talk about serial killers as possessed by demonic force, or now we talk about they're mentally ill, or they don't know what they're doing, or root causes, or whatever. Many people have used this framework to explain the distinctive evil of the Holocaust. The extent of the murderous act seems to defy ordinary analysis and requires some deeper cause. However, Arendt argued the case of Eichmann showed why this traditional analysis did not work. Unlike Hitler, who seemed to personify the demonic, Eichmann was not a dramatic or presupposing figure. He was a former vacuum salesman who rose through the ranks of the Nazi Party just like a person might make a career in any organization. He claimed not to have personally harmed anyone directly and that he was just following orders. Arendt took his words at face value. He was not the expression of a profound force, but rather a superficial person whose life only made sense in terms of bureaucracy. But this did not mean Eichmann was not a perpetrator of evil. Arendt argued that the characteristic of modern evil, its very banality, was the proper lens through which to view Eichmann's actions and the rebuttal to his own defense. And then they go on to say, what are the consequences? How has it played into scholarship on ethics in the Holocaust? For one thing, it helps us understand why evil is so widespread and so difficult to stop. We can't simply identify its deep roots and stamp it out. It's like a weed that no matter how often we treat our lawn, still keeps coming back. We have to take seriously its superficiality and the way in which it can affect almost everyone. It is not surprising that modern mass organizations like armies, corporations, and indeed any form of bureaucracy are sources of evil as well as good. Some recent research on the Holocaust has focused not so much on the schemes of those in charge, but on the ordinary soldiers and citizens whose actions were also necessary for the heinous acts to be committed. And then there's Ordinary Men, which is another great book about that. For another, it makes the simple distinctions between good and evil, virtuous and vicious, much more difficult to make. This has an important bearing on her discussion of Jewish collaboration during the war. When we understand how evil can be banal and work through a group organization, then we understand that it is not always simple to distinguish between perpetrators and victims, as if it were a matter of black and white. Instead, we're more often than not in a gray zone in which we're active parts of systems that do evil. It's not an accident that some students of Hannah Arendt, like Larry May, have written studies of collective responsibility in which they attempt to distinguish many degrees of responsibility. So that is that. Now, why am I bringing that up? Well, because we often hear people say, don't analogize anything to the Holocaust. That's wrong. In fact, you'll see here's the Anti-Defamation League back in 2020. Look at this. No, and Donald Trump is not Adolf Hitler. They're making an impassioned plea to not compare things to the Holocaust. Don't do that. This person isn't Hitler. That person, this isn't Nazi. This isn't Nazi Germany. Stop doing it. Stop doing it. Stop doing it. And it's tempting to agree with them because you don't want to minimize the Holocaust or invert the Holocaust or, belittle the suffering that people went through by talking about things like Donald Trump is Adolf Hitler, whatever. But the problem with this is, as right as they are in the particular arguments they make, like really particular, people have a tendency to blanket apply that and say, don't make any comparisons ever, anywhere at all to things that are like the Holocaust or the lead to the Holocaust. So what that does is it prevents us from having conversations even like this. There's probably somebody who's going to come along and say, Deb, I find it very rude of you to Holocaust survivors that you are talking about a possibility of a second Holocaust based on what you're seeing going on in the streets of, New York and Chicago and whatever. Okay. How dare you? How dare you? That's just a protest. That's just this. There's a war on. Okay. Well, what is never again going to mean? When can we have the conversation? When they're building the actual ovens? When the train cars pull up? I mean, or whatever today's modern equivalent will be. When does the conversation begin? And that's why I want to root the conversation in virtues and moral virtue, moral courage, and the type of society and the type of belief systems that destroy moral courage and clearly identified shared virtues. And I think we're in a place right now where it is analogous. It is analogous to believe that one of the most evolved societies in Europe just suddenly didn't know right from wrong. Like suddenly didn't know it was bad to round up and slaughter women and children and men and old women, men, young men, what are people who had fought for the Kaiser in World War I, patriotic citizens, whatever, by the millions. Never mind, go to other countries, kidnap their people, and do it to them too. What did they have to believe first? And it's too simplistic to say, oh, they had to dehumanize them. Yes, that's part of it. But they had to come up with an alternative morality. They had to replace the don't kill people just because they exist and don't, invade other countries just because they're there and kill the people who live there. They had to replace that with something else that the people would accept. And I submit to you that what they did was akin to the critical social justice we now see so rampant in our education system. They just didn't call it that. They just didn't call it that. Okay. So see if this sounds familiar. They said, Hitler and the Nazis said to the Germans, all this suffering that you're experiencing, the poverty, from the inflation, etc. This is the fault of global Jewry. This is the fault of those Jewish, internationalists, communists, whatever, but Jews. This is the fault of someone else, a specific someone. Sound familiar to, let's say, white supremacy, systemic racism? There's a simple answer for all the problems we're facing right now that are keeping us down and making you feel like crap. It's this intangible thing. They might as well have called it Jewish supremacy. They might as well have called it that. It's systemic. It's in everything. It's in our universities. It's in our economy. It's in the banks. It's everywhere. And they start with that. And then they kind of seed some other stories. They make up a bunch of stuff that's not even true. They run everything. They're doing this. They're doing that. They're taking over this. They're taking over that. None of it was true. But as long as they could find an example, some anecdote here or there, suddenly they were reversing victim and oppressor. They were making a victim, making an oppressor, like we do now with critical race theory and critical social justice, and deciding that the Jew is in the oppressor category of the German by virtue of some kind of mysterious economic forces that they're working and pulling strings. And then, of course, they're physically inferior, culturally inferior. Well, what do we hear even now? It didn't start this way, the whole whiteness dogma. But what are we hearing now about whiteness? That white people are not just oppressive. We're inherently morally inferior, according to critical race theorists. Inherently morally inferior. Inherently violent, inherently oppressive, inherently icky. That's what the Germans did to the Jews. It's in their blood. It's just in them. You're born that way. Sound familiar? So that's the key. When you're they were this enlightened and evolved society, but so enlightened they forgot to hang on to some semblance of objective morality, which I grant you was a little bit hard to do in the aftermath of a completely immoral, stupid war of World War I started by their Kaiser, who himself was a psychopath. And then you're reduced to nothing. So, I'm not saying it was an easy thing to do, but it was certainly easy to exploit by people like Hitler and the Nazis. That's what they did. They created a new morality to replace the old one. So your average German, your average Pole, subsequently, your average person could buy into the idea of, yeah, I'm a victim of you, as they dragged the Jews off to the concentration camps, as they shoved them into ghettos. This is what I have to do to protect myself from you. And that's why I think it's wrong to say we can't analogize it at all. We can't talk about that. Yeah, we kind of have to. We just can't analogize like this guy is Hitler or that, this situation is just like, don't be ridiculous. But if you're going to talk about the pseudo morality that is dominating our culture right now, we have to talk about it. And we have to analogize it or we're going to miss it. We're going to miss it. And here we have the Holocaust Museum saying why Holocaust analogies are dangerous. They're saying it's dangerous. And as tempted as I might be to agree with them in some, like I said, in those little tiny examples of, Trump is Hitler, they at least make the point. This oversimplified approach to complex history is dangerous. When conducted with integrity and rigor, the study of history raises more questions than answers. And as the most extensively documented crime the world has ever seen, the Holocaust offers an unmatched case study in how societies fall apart in the immutability of human nature. You know that thing they're trying to change? They're telling us they can change with SEL. Oh, with SEL, we can just change human nature. We can have a more empathetic and loving society by training. Not that way. Not by telling people what to feel, but by upholding virtue and rejecting evil. I clearly identifying what they are and saying this is this and that is that. And we agree. It's not an ever moving target. But if you say there's no such thing as human nature, which some critical theorists do, or you say you can change it with the proper training and AI and interventions, you're missing it. You're missing the mark. In the dangers of unchecked state power, and of course, this is a key. If we have the power through our education to tell everybody what they have to learn, what they have to do, what they have to know, and where they have to be, and all these things. You can't say this to your kids. You have to say that to your kids, or we're going to take your kids. That's pretty unchecked. If a state can take your child because you won't affirm their made up gender, I'd say that's unchecked state power. Yeah, I don't think it gets more obvious than that. It is more than European and Jewish history. It's human history. So I find this sort of ironic because they're saying don't analogize, but it's human history. Okay. So yes, it's dangerous if you do it in an overly simplistic way or you invert it like they're doing now. Anytime lots of people die, it's a Holocaust. That's not an analogy. That's an inversion. But when you say, as I look around, I see people are being scapegoated. I see that people are being treated like there's no such thing as morality if and when and such. I check a box. That's scary. That's similar to what we've seen in the past. And then I found this article, Legal Insurrection, that I think begins to get at it. Racial doctrines such as critical race theory and intersectionality are the mother's milk of anti-Semitism on campuses. And the reason I'm bringing this up in the context of teaching Holocaust is that traditionally and typically you will see Jewish people at the forefront of efforts to teach about the Holocaust in states and in government and in universities or schools. You will tend to see somebody who's Jewish saying we need to do this. We need to do Holocaust education in our schools for our youth. And that's laudable. That's commendable. I would be one of them. We do need to do that. But where things seem to go off the rails is when we start talking about how should we do that? What should we say? What are the important points to make? And what I tend to see too much is, well, we need to make the point that Jews were oppressed. Jews were victims. Jews were slaughtered. Horrible atrocities occurred to Jews. And then if somebody says, and also to homosexuals, and also to Jehovah's Witnesses, and also to the Roma people, and also they say, no, more Jews died. They get very defensive. No, it's ours. Well, certainly, yes. It was primarily about ridding the world of Jews, but they wouldn't have stopped there. They had no intention of stopping there, just as Hamas has no intention of stopping with Jews. First the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. Anyone who's not Muslim is in their sights. If you're gay, forget about it. They don't care what religion you are. So, to fixate on teaching the Holocaust, yes, it is a really vital thing to talk about in terms of the experience of the Jewish people and Jewish history. But if we cling to too tightly to, we own it, and we should be in charge of how it's taught, and we should be in charge of it, and we were the unique victims, and it's our story, and it's nobody else's story, and we run the risk of missing that important point that, yeah, it's most likely going to be our story, even if it happens again first, because we're the tiniest population. We're the easiest to pick on first. And Jews tend to set themselves apart by customs and so forth. So we're an easy target. However, it's those conditions. And if we're so keen to be in the victim group, to say like, no, we have to be protected because we're in the victim group, like I said, we're going to miss it. We're going to miss that it's about virtue, not victimhood. Real virtue. If you're in such a hurry to classify yourself as in the victim class in a system that has thrown virtue out the window and said virtue equals being a victim, then along can come your enemies like Hamas and say, we're victims. And you know what else? We're victims of you. And what do you do now? What do you do now? Not only that, victimhood isn't the whole story of the Jewish people either. Survival is a pretty big story. So if you're going to focus on the atrocities and focus on the victimhood and forget the complicity of the Jews who went along with it and said, let's just, don't just shut up, don't get in trouble. And the reason that's so relevant today, and I'm going to make a lot of enemies, I'm sure, saying this, is that we have. I'm gonna come back to that article, by the way, but we have other articles and pieces like this one. Who's afraid of critical race theory? Jews should embrace the right's latest boogeyman. This is Jewish independent nonprofit. Hey, Jews, you should embrace critical race theory because of systemic racism, I guess systemic anti-Semitism of the past. So you should embrace it because they have a point. And then we have other things like we have articles like where do Jews fit into critical race theory? Now, this gentleman actually is thoughtfully trying to consider, like, do we fit in? Where does that go? No. Jews don't. I'll explain why in a minute. And then there's more. Let's see. Here's something I found. Critical race theory in the Atlantic Jewish world, pathways and roadblocks. Here is somebody, a Jewish person, teaching about critical race theory and critical race studies and Judaism and Jews and this and that and how to fit in with that. Then we have what else? There was another one. Oh, this fascinated me. White Jews, an intersectional approach. So what I've found, what I'm showing you all this because what I keep finding, as I keep finding pieces that are like desperately trying to like squeeze Jews into intersectionality. Like, okay, so see, we fit. We're not white. We're not part of the oppressor class. We're not that. Instead of saying this entire philosophy is bogus. This is complete bull hockey. And it doesn't matter how true it may be that Jews were systemically, yes, discriminated against until World War II and the GI Bill. And I'm going to talk to you about that in a moment, like when Jews became white. Like, forget phenotype. I'm talking about in terms of how American society saw them. And, like that may be true, but it does not then follow that critical race theory is the way that we address that, or critical race theory and its pseudo morality, where if you have more boxes checked in intersectionality, you're somehow, more virtuous by virtue of your victimhood. And these oppressor people have work to do and they're bad. And that's what we're learning. That's what our kids are learning and what they're being taught. And in fact, Jewish kids are being taught that too. Now imagine the cognitive dissonance of being a Jewish kid. And maybe you've already learned about the Holocaust at home. Maybe you even have a Holocaust survivor in your family, but you go to class and they're teaching about the Holocaust. And they start talking, as the Zinn Education Project does. They have, never forget the Jews of the Holocaust, but then they have related resources and they're almost all about Black people or Cubans or Spaniards, other things, right? Some of it's Holocaust, but what we find is that we're going to bring in this group of people and that group of people and this group of people. It's rarely about the philosophy. It's about who suffered, how much they suffered in relation to other sufferings, and their fight to fight off their oppressors. So what that does is, in addition to tying suffering to group identity, tying survival and overcoming to group identity and participation in throwing off the suffering. Can't do it as an individual. I got to be part of this group. It also silos it in terms of virtue that was then. That was that group of people, the Jews of the Holocaust, not Jews in general, not people in general, just the Jews. We're going to remember them, those guys. But Jews today, oh, they have a different obligation now because reasons. So they can just keep it sequestered in that history, make themselves seem like, oh, we care. Yeah, we're teaching it. Look, Holocaust. But then we're going to turn around and tell you how the Black experience is so similar to what they went through because oppressor. And they'll have that one of those analogies that is false. Those are the dangerous kind. They're not talking about how it's wrong to divide the world into victims and oppressors, us and them, cognitive distortions where it's about the people and not the beliefs or the lack of virtues or the morality, but what group you belong to. That's not the way to teach the Holocaust. And then we have, let's see, what was another example that I've seen? Oh yeah, I mean, you'll get stuff like this: 4 ways for Jews to intersect with intersectionality. Why? Why would you want to? This entire article is about this flag being rejected when some people went to a pride parade because, well, Israel represents oppressors, even though gay people are more welcome in Israel than any place in the region. And they can't have these two things together. You can't have Israel, homeland of the Jews, along with gay pride because that's oppressors with oppressed. And this whole article is trying to like make sense of it. How do we find a place for ourselves on the chart instead of saying your chart is bullshit? Intersectionality is bogus. I am not a list of oppressed classes. I'm a person. And that's not how, but if you think it's safety, which is what I think too many Jews are doing right now, if you think that safety comes in being attached to an intersection on the intersectional chart, the response to Jewish Star in the Chicago Dyke March again forces progressive Jews to choose. It's a false choice. It's a false binary. Choose between intersectionality or being over with the oppressors. How about we all choose to say that intersectionality is a load of crap? It's not a choice between being conservative or progressive. It's not a choice between Republican or Democrat. It's not a choice politically at all. It's a choice morally, ethically, philosophically. Can people really be just divided into little check boxes? Is that how we are? That doesn't work. All of the symbols, and I'm going to come over here now to your comments because I've been seeing so many things come up. So let's see. Adrian says, "Oh my God, it just dawned on me. SEL is Lysenkoism." Yes, it is. They genuinely believe that they can use their Skinnerism to like change human nature and change the kind of society whereby changing individual people and how they think. And then See the Whole Truth says Lysenko claimed that the concept of a gene is a bourgeois invention. He denied presence of any immortal substance of heredity or clearly defined species. Yeah. And SEL does the same. There's no human nature. You're just a bundle of nerve endings, and it's all about stimuli, response. So we just need to find the right stimuli to get the right responses. That's what we need to do. And then the humans will do the things that we want the humans to do. We don't have a conversation about who we are, who's doing the deciding of the stimuli, nor do we have a conversation about whether that's moral for anyone or any group of people to decide what people should want, what people should pursue for themselves individually, other than, as I said, that moral framework. And that could be as simple as do not aggress against others. Period. If someone aggresses against you, it's perfectly moral to defend yourself. Yeah, you have a right to defend your life. But beyond that, no, you don't have a right to aggress against somebody else. You don't have a right to take somebody else's stuff. Well, that'd be a tough one for us to argue because the government does it every day and justifies it as being moral and good. So we're already way down the path of like, shit, we've kind of changed morality to allow for theft and, a little bit of murder, a little bit of kidnapping, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So we have to justify it. Because if we don't change the morality to suit the things we're already doing, we're going to be seen as very bad people. We don't want to be seen as bad people. We want to be seen as good. So what do? You invert right and wrong. But we have just done that to a degree now where it is perfectly okay in the same classroom to tell somebody it is othering and offensive and wrong to ask someone, "Hey, where do your grandparents come from?" Because you heard them speaking in a foreign language. That's microaggression. But it's perfectly fine for the teacher to stand at the front of the room and show an intersectionality chart with boxes and say, the white people are oppressors and the black people are victims and this is this and that is that. And because you were born white, no microaggressions there, apparently. That's perfectly fine. Not abusive at all. But apparently it's abuse to ask somebody where their grandparents came from or how long it takes to do their braids at night. Same classroom. If that's not an inversion of morality, I don't know what is. They've just made what's wrong right and what's really pretty neutral wrong. Uh moving along to other comments, we have Giorgio says they shouldn't make it all about them as it is indeed human history that had repeated in different ways about the Holocaust. I agree, and I'll put a qualified agreement in the sense that, first of all, I don't think Jews should make the Holocaust all about Jews because more than Jews were slaughtered and targeted. And I think when you make it all about Jews, like I said, it makes it easier for the haters of Jews to both deny it, minimize it, and be like, well, they were just Jews, or well, they deserved it, or well, like so whatever, instead of making it about a great evil that was done to humankind and humanity. But also it makes them more likely in the future because you're talking about something that happened in history to a group of people as if that's what makes it noteworthy. It is noteworthy that such a huge percentage of Jews were murdered. And that's important. And we should never discount that. And it has shaped the perception of people of Israel and a lot of things. But that's not the whole story. What we should be learning from, what I took away from my era of Hitler class in high school that I'm channeling to you right now. And I did my paper on the history of his racial views, of his racist views. What I took away was closer to Hannah Arendt's take, which is that regular, average people, your neighbor, your best friend, could turn on you with the right messaging. If they are not rock solid in their morality. And that's not to say, just say it's wrong to kill people. We know that. It's wrong to kill people, period. Okay? So like you don't, it's not suddenly right to kill bad people because someone told me they're bad. If they're literally acting on you and it's like they're going to kill me or I'm going to kill them, then yeah, obviously it's right to kill them. But and you're in a war, somebody attacked you and you've got to stop them from attacking you again and killing you again, then again, we could talk about good war theory. But it's not suddenly right to kill people because someone tells you they're bad people. So unless you also know that, unless you're rock solid in that, no one's going to come to me and convince me that there's this thing called bad people. And they know who they are. And they know who they are because reasons. If you don't know that, if you're not absolutely solid, if you don't look at people trying to tell you that these are the good people and these are the bad people, these are the ones doing the work. These are the ones who care. These are the ones who don't care. These are the ones who are like Nazis. These are the ones who are blah, blah, blah. These are the ones who hate. When you don't really see them doing anything hateful or even really saying anything hateful, they just tell you they hate because they have a different opinion. So if you're not really grounded in what hate means and what it means to be that, then you're going to miss out. So I agree, Giorgio. I think we have to talk about the frailty of human beings when it comes to messaging about good people and bad people. And then he goes on to say, oops, here it is. The lie is that only certain people can be victims. Anyone can be victim. We need to transcend. Yes. And anyone can be an oppressor. That is true. But we also have objective ways of identifying true victims and true oppressors. Let's go back to our Hamas and Israel example. It's so tempting to look at Israel, the big, strong nuclear power, as a big, tiny, strong nuclear power, and say, well, I can more readily believe that they're an oppressor because they have lots more weapons and more money and more this and more that. So certainly it's got to be them. But that's really no different than saying the rich man's a bad guy because he's rich and the poor guy's a good guy because he's poor. We know that's not true. We know that's like absurd thinking. And it's just as true in Israel's case. And I don't need to think that everything Israel's ever done has been perfect to say that. I can just stand back and look at the reality that there are Arabs with absolutely equal rights. You know, they've got equal rights in Israel. So it's not only Jews, it's not a theocracy technically. I can look at the history of the region and who attacked whom first. And again, I don't need to sit there and pretend that Israelis never did anything bad, you know, and on small groups or Irgun was a great group or whatever. I don't need to do that. I can just take a 30,000 foot view and say, which of these two societies supports human thriving, freedom, liberty, you know, like is pluralistic, truly tolerant, allows for freedom of speech, treats women, minorities, children, the elderly, etc., with care, has due process and courts of law, and adjudicates disputes, doesn't have the death penalty, doesn't even have the death penalty. Okay, so I'm looking at Israel, even if I weren't a Jew, I'm going to stand back and look at Israel and go, okay, this is a society that is productive and free and a bastion of sort of liberty. It's not as libertarian as I would like it to be. Okay, and they don't have a constitution, which I wish they had, but just because I don't agree with everything they do, if I'm then going to turn around and compare them to the society in Gaza or even in the West Bank, run by the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, and I look at there is no religious freedom, there is no freedom of the press, women are not free to do what they want. You cannot be gay there at all. You can't in any way disagree with what's going on. There is no due process. If you are even accused of trying to collaborate with Israel, even economically, when they don't want you to, you can be just dragged into the street and shot or hanged. And people will dance around your body. And I don't need to make everything perfect on one side to look at that and say that is not a society that can be legitimately classified as this, oh, we're such victims. The individuals within it are. The individuals who live there, especially those who don't agree with what's going on or trapped, yes, they deserve our sympathy, our pity, whatever you want. But I don't think that means we say stop. No, ceasefire. Let those horrible tyrants who run the place stay in power over them, because I want to. I want to feel good about myself, or I don't want to support the oppressive ones with the bigger bombs. If that's our morality, is guys with bigger bombs are bad, guys who can destroy a city block at a time are inherently bad just because they can do that, then we really aren't thinking past the level of like a kindergartner. Actually, I think some kindergartners would be smarter than that if you put it to them and you gave them the details. And that's the problem. That's where we are now. This is how people you see marching in the street, they're saying, let's see, I see brown skin mostly. Of course, they don't know what Israelis look like if they'd see plenty of brown skin. They're kind of brown and they look poor and pitiful. And I see pictures of children crying. Oh, it's terrible. And they were, they're oppressed. And therefore, these are the bad guys. No more nuance than that. And when you've got Jews saying, where do we fit with the intersectional thing? You're going to lose. The Jews are going to lose that argument. Or Jews are going to have to repudiate Israel. Those are the two choices. So either you jump on board, you want to be in the intersectional chart, you've got to accept what the designers of the chart say about Israel in It doesn't matter that it's Jews in Israel. It doesn't matter that a lot of the people who live there were refugees from the Holocaust. In fact, that makes it worse. They're settler colonial, people. Oh, the Holocaust. We need to remember the Jews of the Holocaust, except the bad ones who went to Israel. Remember them. They went to the wrong country. Now they're oppressors. 5 minutes before they got there, they were victims that we should pity. But 5 minutes after they got there, they were colonial settlers. They're terrible now. You see how that works? This is not a morality that you can that produces anything other than the conditions for another Holocaust. It's a moving target. You just can get people riled up about whatever, scapegoating whatever, and next thing you know, you've got what we saw the other night, which is a bunch of protesters going after a Jewish delicatessen, a restaurant, and screaming at the owner individually because she's Jewish and saying, come out and this and that, and like vandalizing the store. How is that any different than what happened in Germany? What did she have to do with what's going on over there, first of all? And then they come up with their excuse. She gave a bunch of money to the IDF and the soldiers and, relief and sent this and that. Uh, and so for that, she deserves to be attacked. This is not a morality that can sustain anything other than a increase in anti-Semitism. Let's see. Yeah. There's a subtle implication. Only traumatized people are worthy of care and respect. It does not demand attention, but everyone has worries and desires, and everyone has rights. So you're quite right. Everybody deserves respect. Well, let me put this way. Everybody respectable deserves respect. Like if you are just minding your own business, not bothering anybody, then you deserve the respect of being left alone. And your space respected, your property respected, and so on and so forth. You don't deserve the kind of respect where it's like, oh, I respect you. You just deserve to be left alone. Nobody should mess with you. And that is the same whether you're rich or poor, traumatized, not traumatized. If you've lived a charmed life, your whole life has been just bliss, no injuries, no problems. Your parents stayed married, like nothing bad's ever happened to you. That does not make you suddenly unworthy of care and concern. It's ridiculous. And so I promised you that I would talk about the whole when did Jews become white thing, because I think it's relevant to the conversation, in the sense that um, a lot of Jews are confused. Like, but why don't we fit in with critical race theory? I've met people, many people, some of them students, like young kids, like high school age kids, who are so confused. They're being taught critical race theory. They're being taught intersectional theory, all the kinds of critical justice, critical social justice, and then simultaneously being told, especially out in California with ethnic studies and some other places, in New Jersey, that Jews are in the oppressor group because they're white. And they're absolutely perplexed. I don't understand. When did we come up? And because they'll tell you in the next breath, it's not about phenotype, except when it is, right? It's like, but this article by Pamela Paretsky begins to explain it. First, she gives you a whole scenario of a college kid going to college, learning all this stuff by senior year. There's this, you're really steeped in critical theory, but you don't understand like what happened. When did we become, it says you cringe when you read that it's microaggression to say there's only one race, the human race, that's a microaggression. That's something her grandmother always said. Her father, who survived several concentration camps, used to say that too. They aren't racist, but according to the list, it's also a microaggression to deny being racist. So there you are, the Jewish kid in class. You're like, I don't understand. We've been brought up, I know I was, explicitly from a very young age taught because of the Holocaust. We have an extra moral obligation to not be racist, an extra moral obligation to not be bigoted and not be intolerant and all these things. Yes, I was taught that. I don't know what you guys were taught, but as a Jewish kid growing up, that's what I was taught. You have extra responsibility because of the suffering of our people. And it would never have occurred to me anyway, but with that bug in my ear, you could bet your bottom dollar I was like extra specially careful of, the fact that whatever of all of my blessings and whatever you want to call it. I didn't think I was a bad person or oppressive. I just felt responsible to not be racist, which is a big thing to put on kids, but it was. And to find out when all this critical social justice stuff came along that none of that matters. None of that matters because whiteness, because of white. That was very confusing. Like, when did that occur? So she links to this paper. It's called Race and Ethnicity: How Did Jews Become White Folks by Karen Brodkin. It's actually very interesting. I'll put the link in the description below. You can read afterwards. Um, and the important point made in this paper, I don't agree with all of it. Okay, just full disclosure, we went at the bottom. It basically makes the case that critical race theory has a point, um, because of the systemic discrimination, et cetera. And this is where I think they go wrong with critical race theory. They'll take some very real discrimination that was in the system, that was systemic for a time, explain accurately, historically, what dealt with it, what got rid of it, but then turn around and say, so see, like at the end, they get to this point where this person says, those racially skewed gains have been passed across the generations so that racial inequality seems to maintain itself naturally, even after legal segregation ended. Today, in a shrinking economy where downward mobility is the norm, that's a lie, by the way, the children and grandchildren of the post-war beneficiaries of the economic boom have some precious advantages. For example, having parents who own their own homes or who have decent retirement benefits can make a real difference in young people's ability to take on huge college loans or come up with a down payment for a house. So what they're doing is they're saying, because this stuff impacted this population of people in the past, all those benefits stay with you like forever. And that's just not true. That's just not true. People gain and lose fortunes from one generation, like from parent to child, child to their grandchildren. Happens all the time. We just don't hear about it on the news. You hear about heiresses and you hear about people who inherited daddy's money, or what they now call nepo babies or whatever in the celebrity circles. But it is actually much, much more common to see kids who grew up in some measure of privilege just absolutely bereft with lots of debt and all kinds of things because their parents, suddenly lost a bunch of money, or even college was even too expensive for them, or they simply decided we're not paying for it because we disagree, or any number of reasons. It does not automatically follow that the benefits carry on through the generations. For some they do, and for some they don't, but it's not automatic, and it requires a lot of work on the parents' part. You're not static. So that is where I absolutely disagree. But here's what is important to note. Prior, and this paper does a great job of explaining it, prior to World War II in the United States, Jews were not considered white by the majority Northern European Protestant sort of leaders of this country. There were specific, laws and rules and things put in place to kind of keep them out of colleges, we don't want too many Jews in the colleges. I mean, it actually goes through some of the people who said these things. Teddy Roosevelt raised the alarm of race. You probably aren't seeing this. Sorry, here's the paper. Teddy Roosevelt raised the alarm of race suicide and took the Anglo-Saxon women to task for allowing native stock to be outbred by inferior immigrants. In the 20th century, those fears gained a great deal of social legitimacy thanks to the efforts of an influential network of aristocrats and scientists. These are all progressives, by the way, who developed theories of eugenics, breeding for a better humanity. Sound familiar? SEL, for a better humanity. So maybe not so much the breeding, but the sterilizing for sure. Key to these efforts was Madison Grant's influential passing of the Great Race, which, by the way, influenced Hitler. So American progressives, American white progressives, were very alarmed by race mixing and, people, Europeans of the inferior Southern and Eastern races, and especially, worst of all, Jews, who seemed to be everywhere in his native New York City. Grant's nightmare was race mixing amongst Europeans. For him, this is a quote, the cross between any of the three European races and a Jew is a Jew. He didn't have good things to say about Alpine or Mediterranean races either. For Grant, race and class were interwoven. The first critical justice, the critical race theorist, Madison Grant. Far from being on the fringe, Grant's views resonated with those of the non-immigrant middle class. A New York Times reporter wrote of his visit to the Lower East Side. This is how they would talk about people. This neighborhood, peopled almost entirely by the people who claim to have been driven from Poland and Russia, is the eyesore of New York and perhaps the filthiest place in the Western continent. It is impossible for a Christian to live there because he will be driven out either by blows or the dirt and stench. Cleanliness is an unknown quantity to these people. They cannot be lifted up to a higher plane because they do not want to be. If the cholera should ever get amongst these people, they would scatter its germs as a sower does grain. That was mainstream. Mainstream. Okay. So this continued. A narrowly defined white Christian race was also built into the 1705 Virginia Act concerning servants of slaves. So they're not completely wrong that the way white was defined in America as late as 1918, 1920s, and so forth and so on, 1930s, pre-World War II, anytime up until World War II, really up until right after World War II, white did not include Jews. It did not include Eastern Europeans. It did not include Mexicans. It did not include, I mean, you can say, well, Mexicans are white. Many of them are descended from the Spaniards and they look white. So, if you weren't from Northern Europe and you were not Protestant, you were not white. Now, after World War II, then it became less okay to talk this way about Jews, right? That was the immediate effect of the Holocaust. Then it was like, maybe we shouldn't be saying this stuff anymore. And there was the GI Bill. And as you probably know, just like every other American, Jews were drafted. Jews fought in World War II. Jews came back from World War II and were allowed to go to college on the GI Bill. And they couldn't very well say, not you. You can't come. So the same schools that had a kind of affirmative action policy against Jews, like they did about it, like we do about Asians now. You don't want too many. Suddenly found they had lots of Jews going to college. And what that did in a society where the college degree really was currency, it was social currency and economic currency, is it allowed a lot of Jews from those neighborhoods to move up into the middle class and the upper classes. Suddenly, there was a lot of upward mobility, and not just for Jews, of course, for Eastern Europeans, Italians, Irish, you name it. And the middle class was born. And it wasn't just Jews who became white. All of those people became white because they were now in the middle class. They had a certain measure of respectability, so to speak, and they became a little harder to distinguish class-wise and attainment-wise from your white Protestant Northern Europeans. And now they're white. That's what happened. And the problem is a lot of Jews didn't get the memo that there would come a day when they're being white by this cultural means of defining white, would count against them. Because the history, again, that we're all taught at home and in our temples and so on, is that we've been enslaved and in the diaspora and we've been kicked out of every country and, persecuted, et cetera, right up through World War II. And even after, Soviet Jews were persecuted on into the 80s and early 90s in my lifetime. So that's, that's kind of how, how that happened. Now, getting back to the legal insurrection article, and the reason I bring that up is that a lot of Jews, people say, well, so many Jews are progressives. I don't get it. So many are Democrats. I don't get it. I don't understand. Maybe that helps you understand a little better. If generation after generation, and then, you didn't quite get the memo after the 40s and 50s that something new is coming down the pike. And that, having this special responsibility to care for the poor, or care for the downtrodden, or whatever is gonna pose a problem. And you're not a libertarian. You're not philosophically grounded in the ideas associated with not being your brother's keeper, so to speak, like I just happen to be. it seems like a natural fit to be on the side that says we care for the downtrodden, and that's the big marketing campaign. Or the side that my grandparents were such devotees of FDR, which baffled me because he didn't let Jews in to get away from Hitler. But they're going back in their heads to, people like Teddy Roosevelt who said, "Ooh, the filthy, icky Jews." And FDR was a little quieter about it. He's a little quieter. So in their head, it was the Republicans. It was other people, and then more modern Republicans. Not that they were explicitly saying things against Jews, but that they didn't seem to want to take care of the poor, and they had been poor, and they had that sense. They had been victims. They felt this identity or affinity with victims and felt this responsibility, guilt, whatever you want to call it, to remember their roots. And woke up one day, for different people to different points, but for a lot of them on October 7th, to recognize, uh-oh, we don't count anymore. We're not in this group. And as long as we've been teaching the Holocaust as a victim narrative, as opposed to a morality philosophy failure narrative, if you're no longer in the victim class, well, then we can attack you. We can persecute you because you guys aren't designated victims. So now he's talking about nearly as many college students support Hamas as they do Israel amid the raging Middle East war, new survey claims. And we know this to be true. The polls are favoring Hamas. And then he says, one law professor at Cornell University, where a student was recently arrested for making online threats against Jewish students, says he wasn't surprised at the startling pro-Hamas support amongst college students. Hamas student support is a direct result of years of misleading and pervasively dehumanizing anti-Israel campus indoctrination by thousands of activist faculty and administrators under the banner of BDS. Students do not hear both sides. They only hear that Jews are oppressors. So, Jews in America, most of whom support Israel for a whole host of good reasons, are lumped in as oppressors because they do. They're also lumped in as oppressors because Jews are disproportionately financially successful, whatever, in a middle or upper middle class. So are Asians. So are African immigrants. So are Asian immigrants. So are a lot of people. But again, Jews are the tiniest minority in the United States as far as ethnic minorities, and also like relative to the small size, wildly successful. So that sort of, it seems like it shouldn't be if you're raised to believe in equity or that there should be equal representation. So when there isn't equal representation, there isn't even anything close to equal representation. When you have overrepresentation, it's de facto oppression. That's what they've been taught. And so if you teach that in all the classes that aren't Holocaust, and then you go over to teach the Holocaust and you say, well, the Jews, whatever, at best, you're going to get people saying, well, that was then. Or at worst, minimizing it, saying, based on what I now know or am told about the white Jews now, the oppressor Jews now, Israel now, the Holocaust must be a lie. They made it up. I've seen that in the last month. Based on what I know now about critical social justice and Israel being so oppressive, I don't believe any of that stuff even happened. And I feel like we did it to ourselves because of the way we taught about these atrocities. We taught about the atrocities. We taught about the Germans, about Hitler. We made it about him. We made it about a swastika. We made it about a lot of things that it was about, but not the whole story. Not the whole story. And let's see what else. Let's see, there's a lot of stuff in here. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get this is an interesting question. How did people adulate kings? How are we treating protected groups with fawning servility and discreetness? It's like they're royalty, but they're not the same. That's a really good question. It's not just that we're saying, oh, you're oppressed and you deserve extra special care. It's like a kind of worship of that. I think that derives in large part from, you know, the postmodernist kind of philosophy of the noble savage concept, the idea that you are the way you are due to other people's actions. That's why, restorative justice. Well, he's stealing because he's poor. Well, he killed those people because he's never. Well, it's racist to accuse Arabs of rape, but we have them on video doing it. Yes, but well, look what you made them do. Like that Holocaust inversion tweet. Look what you made them do. You put up a wall. Why did they put up a wall? They put up a wall because there were attacks. They put a wall because of attacks. That's why there was a wall. But we don't talk about that, just the wall. And that's the problem. I'm trying to see if I have any other materials. I just found so many. Yeah, here's one. This kills me. It's time for intersectionality to include the Jews. Intersectional theory is uniquely suited to take on anti-Semitism, but intersectional activists often refuse to do so, perpetuating the prejudice instead. This kind of article infuriates me. And it's in a Jewish magazine. It's time for intersectionality no, it's time for intersectionality to go the way of the dodo, to go the way of the protocols of Zion. It is time to stop lying to human beings that human beings come in oppressor and oppressed as groups. No, they don't. No, they don't. You can look at policies and you could say, this policy is discriminatory. You shouldn't have it and deal with it on its face without saying, oh, there are these classes of people. Yet the people who sell this crap to you will tell you that you can't have morality. You can't have a moral system where we fight discrimination, we fight racism as it occurs or wherever we find it without having some kind of chart, some kind of scientific cheat sheet. I feel like we live in the blogosphere where everything has to be the 15 steps to fighting racism. No, the step is simple. Take a look at what you're dealing with right in front of your face. Is it objectively moral? And let's take an emissions policy. Just as an example, the emissions policies back in the early part of the 20th century United States. Do we accept the applications of students and look at their performance on the same tests they're all taking, the grades, the so on? Do we have interviews and do we treat them as individuals and say, you know what, you're really good and you're better than the other guy who came, so we're going to accept you? Or are we looking at them and going, well, we have too many people who are of your kind? I think it's safe to say we can say that's not a moral policy. Let's not do that. Let's not treat people as representatives of icky things we don't like. Let's not project onto people fears, irrational fears that aren't represented in the individual person right in front of us. Let's not lead with envy. How about that? That's another one. You can do that on a case-by-case basis, actually more easily, more nimbly than you can make change, really effective change, an entire culture at a time. Let's teach all the kids this thing. No, let's teach them to think. Let's teach them to discern right from wrong on an individual basis. And you won't have these policies. You don't need intersectionality. You need admissions officers who aren't dialed into some bullshit chart about kinds of people. Because all we've done is replace the grant version of the race is getting erased, whatever, with a newfangled one. That's all we've done. That's all we've done. And now you'll see black faces everywhere. But sorry, Asian kid, you can't come to college because we need to have more black people. Back then it was white people. There's no difference. You're expressing a racial preference for a dumb reason, for a reason that has nothing to do with anything real. That's immoral. So I reject this. This is 2017. I wonder I would love to find this guy and go, how do you feel now? You still agree that we need to fit Jews into intersectionality? And then you have this kind of stuff that will come out of that. Governor Newsom launches Governor's Council on Holocaust and Genocide Education. So now, instead of doing what we should do, which is say, all right, we're going to teach the Holocaust, we're going to teach about the conditions and the type of society, whatever. We can't do that because that would sort of point the finger at people like Newsom, wouldn't it? Yeah, and his diversity plans and so forth. No, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about generalized bigotry against other people and, have representation of other groups that are oppressed in our Holocaust education. We're going to play the just like us game. We also us, me too, me too, me too, which of course leaves room for us to put the Holocaust in the past, like in a box, and say Israel is like the Nazis. When any objective assessment will tell you that is completely insane. Lots of people died. Lots of people died. That's all that matters. No, it's not. So this is what we see. And this is what we see, by the way, around the country. This new Biden. We're going to fight anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. We're going to fight anti-Semitism and racial bigotry. Anti-Semitism is kind of its own unique thing because it's like, what is it? Are you prejudiced against a religion? Are you prejudiced against, it's not really race, it's an ethnicity. Why this and not that? Like, it is kind of its own thing. It does need to be discussed that way because there are specific tropes that people need to understand and not repeat. So when they tack on other stuff, it's pretty obvious what they're trying to do. And they're trying to intersectional it. They're trying to critical race theory it and put Jews in their place, which of course they mean to be the whiteness place because of the class success. And then there are those who will say, well, if anti-Semitism didn't exist, anti-Semites would invent it. And I tend to agree with that. But I think when it comes to facing down the possibility of another Holocaust of Jews, either in this country or in the West in general, I think it is more likely than it's ever been in history because we are so bought in to critical social justice, critical theory, intersectionality that we can't even we can't back out of it. And when I say we, I mean Americans, Westerners. It is now to the point, like I said, this very broadcast is likely going to have me branded all kinds of bad things, including by Jews who might say, how dare you? How dare you blame us in any way, shape, or form for this? And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I do. I blame not all Jews, obviously, but I blame the individuals who jumped on board with critical race theory, who jumped on board to say, pick me too. I want to be a victim. Put me in the intersectional class too. No, I'm not really white. Not because you are white, but because the whole concept of whiteness is bullshit. Not because you weren't a victim in the Holocaust, because the concept of being a victim and virtue being intertwined is bullshit. Because you're missing the point. You are trying to fight othering with othering. You're trying to fight irrationality with unreason. And instead of getting everybody back to a place where we can never again, we say never again, it has to be never again are we going to allow virtue to be corrupted and inverted. And yet that's what we've done. Critical race theory, critical social justice inverts virtue. Honesty doesn't matter. It's whatever I think. It's my way of knowing. It's my feels, my perception, my truth. What happened to facts? What happened to honesty? I don't need to be honest because I'm a victim. I don't need to honest about what? Reality for starters. You just take gender. You're born a man. You're not a woman. I feel like a woman though. Well, it's inherently dishonest. I don't care what you feel like. You aren't one. And we're not going to reinvent reality to suit what it is that you feel like. I'm not being dishonest to deny you that. You're being dishonest to insist that you are. But instead of making honesty the virtue and sticking to facts and reality the virtue and dealing with that, even if you don't like it, and coming up with a way to cope and saying, you know what, I don't feel comfortable being a man. I don't really want to be one. Okay, well, let's talk about that. That's different. That's a different issue. You need help with that discomfort. You don't get to turn around and make everybody else uncomfortable because you don't like reality. And that's what intersectionality is. That's what critical race theory is. And if you're going to teach Holocaust through that lens, we can never again allow the oppressed and marginalized people to be oppressed and marginalized, or we'll have a Holocaust. That's not the message. People will be oppressed and marginalized forever and ever more as long as people do not cleave to moral reasoning. If you don't lead with that and you don't define as a society, this is what it means truly to be a moral person. And you let it be decided by whatever makes somebody feel good. This is what you're going to get. You're going to get another Holocaust. It may be the Jews. It may be the Jews and somebody else. It tends to lead with the Jews again because it's small population. Small population, easily othered, easily isolated, and very easy. There's so many tropes that you just don't have to make new ones. Just bring them back to the surface. Bring them back to the surface. And there's something for everyone. You can get, disgruntled Black people mad at Jews. You can get disgruntled Asian people mad at Jews. You can get disgruntled white people mad at Jews. You can get anybody who's feeling anger, fear, resentment, envy. And you take this tiny population of people. In the United States, we've got approximately, I think, between 6 and 7 million. That's like almost the population of New York City. All of them, the whole country. That's not that hard to isolate that type of a population. So, yeah, it's very, very easy to do. Is there anything that I didn't answer? I know I kind of like went around and around on this, and I know it's kind of hard to understand, but the core of my argument is if you teach the Holocaust as a bunch of events and as something that only happened to Jews, as something that is sort of unique in human experience, and that not tied to philosophy and morality, I think you're going to get another one. And I think it won't matter how much we remember the Holocaust. We won't be able to prevent another one. There'll be people standing around going, this is different. This is different. They're being mean to those people. They're bad people. This is different. They deserve it now. So that's what I've got. I really appreciate you guys giving me your time this evening. And again, as always, wait, there's a question here. I doubt they put it into humanities classes. And then are those even real anymore? Humanities? I haven't seen, only at the college level, and I'm not really sure what they teach. Hi, Mac. Missed you at the start of this. I always value your commentary. I hope you'll go back and watch the replay. The general gist of what I've been talking about is, to sum it up, Jews should not want to be considered in the intersectional framework. They should be at the forefront, on the vanguard of fighting critical theory. And yeah, I'll go right out there and say that I think that Jews in the world, if we had any kind of a responsibility to our own story, to our own history of the Holocaust, to do something different now, or to make sure it never happens again, the number one step we could take right now is to fight with all we've got to tell the truth and absolutely tear critical theory to shreds. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing is the opposite. I am seeing groups, even student groups, going, we're so glad that this person says that we are victims too, and we belong. And it's like, no, honey, that's not, someone's always going to be able to go, but you're not as much a victim as these guys. Stop the comparison. Just stop. Fight critical theory. Fight the pseudo morality and the pseudo reality that it represents, and you have a better chance of preventing another Holocaust than trying to become part of the critical theorist framework. That is just, in fact, every time I see it, it makes me really, really angry. It makes me really angry. And what am I gonna say? I've told Jewish people, stop it. And unfortunately, there's a lot who are not listening. There are some who are, but there are a lot who are not listening. So that's what I had to say. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, subscribe, comment on the in the comment section if you missed the live. If you have something to say, I'll try to respond. And again, please consider signing up for my community at wokescreen.com/the reason we learn. It's a Discord community, but it also gives you access to 2 more private live shows per week, one on Monday, one on Friday, and a huge resource that gets added to every day of material for people who are looking for other alternatives for education, research materials, places they can go to find enrichment classes for their kids. If your kids are stuck in school, but you want enrichment, that's in there. And I have some cool t-shirts too. I do want to make a plug, since I'm wearing it, for my friend Birdie's stuff. I'm standing up because of my hip. I don't know if you can see this t-shirt. It's one of my favorites. And my friend Birdie Rose, the famous artist Birdie Rose, it says, "I shall file your lost admiration carefully in the box where I keep my missing fucks." It's in like J.K. Rowling font, and she has fantastic stuff. I don't know if it's bone density loss. It's actually not my hip bones. I've had x-rays. There is something wrong with my tendons, ligaments, all the soft tissues up in there. I need physical therapy, but I have pretty much constant pain when I'm sitting. So I have to either lie down or stand. Sitting is extremely uncomfortable. And I'm actually waiting for the new year, because then I'll have better insurance and I'll be able to go to better physical therapy than I could get through my insurance, maybe an osteopath even. I thought it was sciatica, Sadie, but and it could be. It could be. Remember, this sciatic nerve is just this gigantic bundle. I mean, it's humongous, probably like the size of your finger, but it tends to run down the back, and my pain is exclusively in the front. So I don't know. It could still be one of the nerves that comes off of that little tree of nerves, but it goes down the front and kind of ends at my knee. It doesn't continue down the leg or go to my foot. I have no numbness or tingling or that. It's almost like, the way to describe it would be, imagine you feel like you have a Charlie horse, but all the time in my thigh. So when I'm standing, it's eased. I believe it or not, it's better with movement. If I walk, it feels better, which is odd. And that doesn't sound like sciatica. Sciatica is really hard to walk. So I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm guessing I have some kind of weird tendon muscle thingy going on right up in there when I bend and move in that way. And we're going to get to the bottom of it. But in the meantime, BioFreeze is a godsend. So to those who recommended it, thank you so much. It's the only reason I can sleep at all. And I hope you'll come back on Wednesday night for my show with James. We're going to talk about college. And that's all I've got for you today. On Monday, by the way, I'm going to make a plug for this. Next Monday's Distant Dispatch, I have a document to show you. I've been waiting for clearance to show it to you, but it is absolutely insane. But it's kind of the newest, most evolved equity thing that is out there. It's a whole booklet. They're putting it into schools all over the country, and I'm going to bring it to you. We're going to go through it like, page by page. So I hope you'll come back for that. I'll be, putting something up towards the end of the week for that one. In the meantime, thank you everyone for coming, and please like, share, and subscribe if you aren't already. You guys are awesome. Have a great night.